Welcome to the weekly Mac Forum video chat. This is the June 25th edition, and we hope that you enjoy the information that we have on tap for you tonight. So let's get right into it without any further ado. First of all, as we go through our forum roundup, member Garros, I think I'm pronouncing that right, asked the question, given that High Sierra is going to be out officially sometime later this year, probably mid-October, give or take a week or so. That's if Apple stays on their typical release pattern. That's about when I would expect it. The public beta releases are probably going to start a little bit later this month, or at the latest first week of July. So it's probably reasonable to expect the final release, the public release, to be sometime about mid-October. And the question that they had was, how long is Apple going to continue to support El Capitan, the previous release? So that would give you support through two releases. By the time High Sierra comes out, El Capitan would be two releases behind. And the question is, how long will Apple continue to support El Capitan? It's an important issue for things like, as you know, if you're running Safari, the update for that browser tends to come as part of updates to the operating system. The reality is no one knows for sure. They haven't made an announcement about that. I would think, personally, that they would continue. Jake, one of our members here, this may be Ian. Yeah, it sure is. Ian pointed out that there isn't really a set of rules as far as when they decide to drop support. And when you look at the issue of support, you're talking about really two different things. General updates and security updates. The reason I break those down into two different issues is sometimes you will see a security update even though other updates to an OS haven't been posted. I think it's a good question to ask. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. My guess is that it's not going to be immediate. You're probably going to see about another year, maybe year and a half, before they drop support for El Capitan. But that's strictly a guess on my part. I think a lot of it will be dependent upon how many people adopt High Sierra and how well that adoption phase goes. If you have a high percentage of eligible Macs running High Sierra, then there's going to be less pressure to continue supporting El Capitan. I think it's going to be really a wait and see kind of thing. If I were still running El Capitan, I wouldn't rush right out and update to High Sierra right now when it comes out. I mean, unless you're just one of these people like myself that doesn't mind troubleshooting these kinds of issues. High Sierra is going to make some changes that will mean that some folks are going to want to sit back for a little while and see how it goes. Mainly with the announcement recently that Apple is not going to support 32-bit applications anymore, it's going to mean that some applications need to be updated. So what you're probably going to see is a lot of users who update to High Sierra running a partition that has High Sierra so they can test it out, and then staying with their main install being El Capitan or Sierra to see how that behaves itself. So we'll keep you posted on that. If I see anything about it as I'm coming through the forum and searching on various places, if I see anything about an announcement, I'll let you know. But right now, the reality is we really don't know when that's going to disappear. And as I say, we'll probably see a sort of a phase out where general support will stop before the security updates do. They'll continue to make security updates for some time. But eventually, we are going to see a point where support for El Capitan will gradually drop by the wayside. All right, next question, and I put this in there. We've talked about this a little bit before, but it seems to come up periodically over and over again. Looks like member Minomir, wanted to know about booting Windows from an external drive. Specifically, they're asking about using Boot Camp to boot Windows from an external drive. Well, right now, and as you scroll through the thread, you'll see that I believe it's Charlie pointed this out. You can't do that under Boot Camp. And it's not a shortcoming of Boot Camp. It's a function of the anti-piracy setup that Microsoft has in place for Windows. If you are running in a virtual machine, that virtual machine can boot from an external hard drive. You can do that. But if you want to create a Boot Camp partition and straight boot into Windows, you can't do that. It doesn't work. And I know that causes some issues for those of you that have flash drives in your Mac, where you have a small, like some of the recent MacBook Pros had small flash drives in them, 120 gigabyte flash drives. By the time you divide space for OS X and space for Windows, you haven't left yourself room for a lot of anything else. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about ways to run Windows. A lot of things will perform reasonably well in a virtual machine setting, including some games. But anything that has a fairly high graphic demand on it, I mean, games that put a lot of graphic demands, or CAD CAM software. I know some people have posted about that from time to time. That stuff most often does not run well in a virtual machine. It almost needs to be a straight boot into Boot Camp. And that's harder to do with these machines that have smaller amounts of storage. And it's partly because you can't boot Windows from that external drive. Now, I think I've seen some things on the internet that say you can do it, but it involves jumping through some significant hoops. I've never tried it. I don't run Windows often enough to justify giving myself that big a headache. Okay? But really, just as a straight setup, you can't do it because of the way that Microsoft has set up some of their anti-piracy measures. All right, I'm sure that will come up again and again as more and more people start looking at different ways to run Windows. All right, moving right along, we have a battery calibration issue. Shuby Stomper, what a name, I like that, is asking a question about battery calibration. Okay, and those of you that, if you've been using a notebook for any amount of time, know that if you want to get some good battery readings on the health of your battery and how to get the most life, and the OS can tell you how much battery life is left in each charge, but it requires that you calibrate it. Okay? And that you basically teach the software how to read how much life is left in the battery. And I have a link to this page, LifeWire. Apple has some information about this as well. I'll put some links to both of these in the show notes. But essentially, you have to calibrate that battery. Now, that's fine if your replacement battery is an Apple battery. Okay? But on some of the older models of notebooks that Apple has now classified as quote-unquote vengeant, where'd that word come from? You didn't hear that, folks. Uh, Laptops that Apple has classified as vintage, um, no longer, generally, as a general rule, you're not going to get batteries directly from Apple for those vintage machines. My 2008 MacBook Pro was classified as vintage quite a while ago. You can no longer really easily get an Apple battery for those machines. There are some third-party batteries that you can get. Some of them are better than others. But the downside to the third-party battery is that it doesn't often calibrate as well. So you may not be getting accurate readings on how much battery life you have left. I've pretty much given up getting a good battery life out of my 2008 MacBook Pro. I've tried two different batteries, and neither of them give me the kind of life that I was getting, anywhere close to the kind of life that I was getting from an Apple battery when I first got it. So you're going to see on eBay, Amazon, other places, batteries from third-party vendors. These are generally not Apple batteries. And some of them are good and hold up and do give good service. But be careful and be aware of my guess would be that one of the things you will want to do is to deal with a company that has a decent return policy in case you're not getting good battery life out of that battery, because the calibration that you do to make the software understand how much life is left in that battery doesn't always work on those older batteries. And even if it does, sometimes you don't get the life out of those batteries that you would expect. So if you're going to buy, I understand that because it's been declared quote unquote vintage, you're stuck buying third party batteries. I get it. I'm in the same boat. But be aware that you may or may not get a battery life that you expect. So just wanted to give you a heads up about that. I had forgotten about that. It's been a while since I ordered a battery for that particular Mac. All right. Another thing that comes up periodically, and I have a link to this as well, is dealing with some situations where your iCloud account is asking for a password from a previous Apple ID. And this page has some ideas for that. Sometimes you'll run into this with situations where people have two different Apple IDs. I do. Somewhere along the way, I've created two different Apple IDs. Now, fortunately, I still have access to my original because I have access to the original email account that I used to set it up and some other things. But sometimes you will kind of lose access to something. So this gives you some ideas about what to do if you can't access that account. I can't really pull these up right now. It won't pull up the same way because for me, I can still have access to both of the two Apple accounts. But this will give you an idea of what you may be able to do to solve that issue. One of the things that I can say, just as a general rule, try to avoid two Apple IDs. It creates all kinds of havoc if you're not careful. You'll think you're updating your apps using one ID and you're using another. All of those kinds of things. So try to keep that in mind as you're searching through and creating Apple IDs. All right, now we're going to move on to a couple of iPhone tips. This first one is how to turn on Do Not Disturb for contacts. If you've got a contact, say that you do not want to be disturbed at a particular time. I didn't pull this one up on my phone, but essentially it's a straight deal where you open messages, okay? You select the conversation that you want to set to do not disturb and tap the little I in the upper right hand corner and toggle do not disturb. I didn't set that one up on my phone because there's nobody that I really want to put on do not disturb right now. But as you can see, this is an easy one to do. You can toggle that for individual conversations. Now the next tip that I have, I'm going to get out of, I'm going to close Safari here for a second. I'm just going to dip this down a little bit, get a couple of things out of the way real quick that I thought I had closed. And I want to show you the other tip that I had set up for the iPhone. Let me get QuickTime up. This is a little screenshot that I did. Now this first one, I believe, talks about messages. And specifically, if you have messages to show you notifications on your home screen, on your lock screen, sometimes it will show you the message. In other words, not just who the message came from, but the actual content of the message. If you don't want it to show you the message content, here's how you do that. You're going to go to messages, going to go to settings. All right, let me let this roll forward here. Going to go to notifications, scroll down to messages, and change this behavior. So you can control here. Do I want messages to show in the notification center? Do I want to completely disallow all notifications? If you choose this first option, it's going to show, it's going to turn it all off. If you have this set to off, I've got it on right now. If you have it set to off, it's going to turn off all notifications for messages. As you see, you can show it in the notification center. And here's the one that we were talking about. Show it on the lock screen. This is a yes or no. Right now I have it set to yes. I don't mind if it's showing me on the lock screen. If I wanted to change that to no, all I would do is just toggle this setting, and that would take care of that. And then down here, as you can see, you have some control over what type of notification you receive. All right. So that's something that you want to keep in mind for messages. I had forgotten about that until I read a tip on the iPhone Life site. And in just a second here now, we're going to move. I'm going to back out of that because I want to show you one other privacy tip for the iPhone. And we're going to go, as you can see, I'm getting out of this, and I'm going to go to Safari. Now, let me pause for just a second and show you something in Safari, in the Mac version. As you can tell from Safari, in the Mac version, you have an option that says open a private window, a new private window. But in the iPhone version, you have the same option, but you have to go about it a little differently. First thing you're going to do is you're going to open Safari. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to touch that little page that has the two pages, bring up the viewer that shows all your previous pages. When you touch private, it puts it like this, where the page is outlined in black. Okay? Now, so let's take a look. Let's go back just a second and take a look at what happened there. All right? I'm going to touch this little area right here. All right. When I do that, I get a slightly different Safari window, and you'll see the change here in just a second. What's going to happen? The area will turn black, and I'll see a group of pages, mainly the page that I'm on. All right. I'm going to let that start itself again. Scroll forward just a little bit. There you can see that's what you get. Now, when you tap private, as you can see, it's coming up here now. When you do that, you get this screen that looks like this. And from now on, until you change it, until you click done, you're surfing in private mode. Now, private mode does not mean that the server doesn't track you, but it does mean that Safari does not store a record of where you have been. Okay, it doesn't mean you're not being tracked by search engines or servers or that kind of thing, but it does mean that the information is not being stored on your phone. When you want to get rid of private browsing mode and go back to normal, basically you touch this area that says private again, and then you can click done. And the way to tell if you're in private mode is, as you can see, as long as I'm in private mode, this whole area is black. Now you can see this is back in normal mode. I've gotten out of private mode. So that's a good one to keep in mind and keep handy in case you ever have to enable private mode, or you have a reason where you want to enable private mode on your iPhone or your iPad. That's the procedure in 10.3, which is the current OS. I believe that process has been around for a little while. You've had that option for a while. Probably, I have not seen it yet because the public beta hasn't been released. But in all probability, the version that's in number 11 in iOS 11 will be the same. All right, and last but not least, I won't even pull this one up on the screen. I'm gonna, as a bonus for you this week, have some tips from our old buddy Kirk McLaren, aka Kirk the iTunes guy, about pulling movies into iTunes. Some of the things that you encounter with movies and some other content in iTunes. I'll have a bonus link to a Macworld article that he did about that recently, and that should give you some other useful tips. They're kind of hard to go through right now. They're easy to follow from his description. As usual, he's written something that's pretty easy to follow. So we'll leave that as kind of as a bonus for this week. And that's going to just about do it for this week's tips and tricks. And I've enjoyed bringing them to you. I hope you find some of those useful. The tip about Safari and private browsing on the iPhone, I had completely forgotten about. I don't use private browsing mode on the iPhone very often. In fact, I don't browse very often on the iPhone. I find, for me, just my personal use, web pages on the iPhone I find a little annoying because of all the scrolling and sliding that you have to do. It's not a function of the iPhone being bad. That's been true of every smartphone I've ever owned. I just don't like surfing the web, surfing Safari on, surfing with Safari or any other browser on the iPhone. That's just me. I will do it on the iPad because you got the larger screen, but you still have access to the private browsing mode if you need it. So that's going to just about do it for this week, guys. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I'll have the show notes up probably later this evening. I've got to type them into something that's somewhat coherent. But as usual, it'll have links to everything that we talk about. And until next week, this is your host, Sly Dude, and I'll see you in the forum.